I am very convinced that my family and I lived in a haunted house. This house was on the outskirts of Los Angeles near the city of Vernon. Though my mom had more incidents while living there, I can honestly say I witnessed one, perhaps two experiences. For the record, I never felt as if the house was unwelcoming or heard anything out of the ordinary. It was a small house with two bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and a little hallway leading towards the bathroom, which was at the back of the house. The first encounter occurred when I was 23 back in 2003. I never believed in the paranormal, even after hearing stories of that kind from friends and family. If anything unusual took place, I would always explain them away as a figment of my imagination. Yet, these couple of incidents have kept me wondering to this very day. At the time, I had two jobs. I had little time to exercise. I thought about jogging around the neighborhood. However, with the frequent incidents of crime coupled with cars carelessly hitting pedestrians, I thought it better to exercise in my room. I grew into the habit of playing loud music while sprinting back and forth in the dark. Doing this did work up a sweat as I moved from one side of the room to the other. One night, I decided to borrow one of my mom's red pillar candles. Instead of jogging in the dark, I decided to place this candle on my desk chair and have it lit in the dark. I made sure the chair was on the other side of the room, right in front of the door. Looking up at the ceiling, there was a strange shadowy division where half of the room was lit while the other side remained in semi-darkness. I would see the lit candle from the corner of my eye every time I would turn before running towards the other side just before reaching my closet. Having Bon Jovi's song Keep the Faith thundering loudly in my room, I was running harder and harder, always seeing the candle's light flicker with my movement. Sweating very much while breathing hard through my nose, I was very determined to move faster and faster. Yet suddenly, the moment just before turning, while my right eye had a side view of the lit blood red candle, a black figure emerged from it and sprinted towards me. In that split second, I saw that shadow run behind me as I turned to head towards the other side. As I kept running back and forth, I felt chills of cold sweat. I spent the next couple of minutes trying to process what I saw. After the song ended, I decided to turn on the light. I went in front of the chair and stared into the candle and kept replaying what I saw repeatedly. If this was just another mind trick, then why did I feel as if something else was in my room, watching me? I blew out the candle and promptly gave it back to my mom. I had no idea what prompted me to see a black shadow mimic me by sprinting past me. I wonder if the lit candle had anything to do with it. Soon after, I decided to get a gym membership at Bally's. The second occurrence was just as frightening. Between 2007 and 2008, my mom left the country to visit family. At the time, my brother would bring his girlfriend over during the late nights. I would have the house all to myself during most evenings. Every night, before going to sleep, I would keep my room door open just so I know when my brother comes home. One night, I could not fall asleep and kept staring up at the ceiling. With the faint ticking of the clock in my room, my eyes then rested on the green digital clock of the stove that stood beyond the doorway of my room. The stove had a muted white color that still stood out in the darkness. I kept staring at the clock and waited for it to turn 2:30 a.m. While waiting, suddenly the shape of a black head peered over the doorway, covering the green digits of the stove. I was petrified, staring at the head that was obviously looking at me. I did not dare move as the head stood perfectly still. The head was completely round and black. What seemed like minutes, the head held its ground and observed me. But after about 20 seconds, the head retreated from the doorway to the right. While watching the green ditches of the stove, I listened for footsteps or any sounds to indicate that it was maybe my brother checking in on me to see if I was awake so he could sneak in his girlfriend. but the house stood quiet, except for the faint clock ticking. By morning, I got up and went to the living room and knocked on my brother's door. After a few knocks, I opened the door and discovered that his bed was undisturbed. I called him with pure anxiety and asked him if he had come over last night. Before he could answer, I asked him if he peered over into my room to see if I was asleep. There was a long pause until he cleared his voice and said, "Yeah, I did." Well, that was good enough for me, and then proceeded to scold him to not ever do that again. Deep down, I don't believe that it was my brother who stared at me that night. In that moment, I felt the exact same way I did on the night I saw that shadow barreling towards me. In all, I lived in that house for a total of 9 years. Between the sprinting shadow and the peering head, those are experiences I will not wish upon anyone else. One day at work in 2009, I was standing towards the store entrance waiting for a customer to arrive. On this slow day, a coworker, Frank, who worked in the technical service for wireless devices, came over next to me. I remember him as someone who was extremely nice to customers and coworkers alike. I told him how I couldn't recall ever seeing him upset. He laughed and stated, "Well, I wasn't always like that. Back then, I would always get angry and snap at anyone who dared to talk to me," he continued. Frank mentioned how there was something that happened to him as an 8-year-old that made him change his ways. On a late evening, Frank was in the living room watching TV. His mom entered the room and asked him to take out the trash. "I'll get to it when I can," he snapped. Visibly upset, his mom mentioned how he never does follow through on doing his chores and that his siblings are the ones who end up doing them. "Ma, I told you I'll get to it later." Frank's mom turned on the lights and stormed towards the TV and shut it off. She quickly faced him and warned him to take out the trash and to do it now. Frank huffed as he got up to go to the kitchen. He was cursing to himself as he grabbed a garbage bag. He went outside the kitchen door and stomped through the driveway on his way to the garbage bins in the backyard. As he arrived, Frank lifted his gaze towards the garbage bins. What he saw quickly halted him into a paralyzed state. Frank noticed a black figure standing on top of the garbage bins. It was darker than the background night. He first noticed the hooves as feet and the horns on its head. The figure stood perfectly still as Frank started to breathe harder. After what seemed like time was frozen while he just stood there looking at this black demonic figure, Frank dropped the bag, turned around, and ran back to his house. He collapsed in the kitchen when his mom saw him. She asked what happened. Frank just pointed to the door while shaking. His mom just shook her head. "You saw something dark, didn't you? See? Your attitude attracts negative energy. There you go." I just looked at Frank. He nodded. "I wasn't religious back then," he quietly stated. "But from that night on, I realized that if the evil side exists, then so must God." I just nodded as Frank walked away with a smile and nod, noticing a customer approaching the entrance.